This is a really peaceful place. People come here to the Ojai Valley in Southern California from all over the world. Artists and spiritual organizations and figures, because they recognize the peacefulness of it. But at the same time that we're in such a peaceful place, all over the news now are stories about the war in Ukraine and the atrocities being committed there. Hundreds of people being murdered after having their arms tied behind their backs, women being raped in front of children.
Прямое попадание было в роддом. Мы эвакуировали, старались оттуда беременных женщин. У них разорваны животы. Это не рассказать даже словами и не описать, что вообще там происходило. Люди едят сырое мясо, готовят на кострах. Много, просто там людей убивают. Города нет. Его равняют с землей.
Look, this is not negotiable. It's a matter of our very humanity. At the very least, we can form a peace brigade for any conflict. See the end of this video for details. I'd like to know, what's the relationship between the horrors of the war going on right now at this very minute far away and the peace in our own lives right here? I think we realize that we're all involved in it, in the war, whether we want to be or not, simply in virtue of our humanity. And therefore, we have to take some kind of position. But it's impossible to wrap our heads around it. There's just too much misunderstanding and enmity, not to mention brute force, blood, and murder. Sure, one side is probably in the right, or at least more right than the other. One side's better, and one side's worse. Who is better, and who is worse? We're the better ones, of course. It's what we like to call liberal democracy, the rule of law, freedom of speech, checks and balances, respect for the truth. Who wouldn't support that? Of course, we do have a few problems of our own: poverty, homelessness, inequality, for example, and our economy is on the verge of collapse, and our population is at odds with each other. But at least we think we're happy, or are able to pretend that we are. I think of this statement by the foreign minister of Germany at the United Nations at the beginning of the war. Russia's war marks a new reality. It requires each and every one of us to take a firm and responsible decision and to take a side. Is that what we need to do? To take a side? Is that what our progress and intelligence has led us to? It's so easy to say that Mr. Putin is a crazy tyrant. The New York Times pundits have even been criticizing him for his height, his literal height. What that means to me is that the mainstream media has advanced not one iota. We're just a little more urbane, a little more clever, a little more foolish.
What we've seen so far is only a small taste of what's to come. Vladimir Putin is completely and absolutely the most evil man who exists in the world today, and he's got terrible, terrible things in store for us going forward.
War is the great unmasking. It's easy to be pleasant when things are going well, but when push comes to shove, which is what war really means, how will we react? Through the ancient way of struggle, of reptilian reflexes, of nature red in tooth and claw, of blood and bloodthirstiness? Or is there another way? Here in the Ojai Valley, a place of such peace, I wonder about peace. I want to be a part of the world as it really is, to know how it works. And I have to say that it doesn't scare me, and that we don't have to give in. We don't have to batten down the hatches and blind ourselves to the views of others, the realities of others, and fight like a beast. In fact, the more society suppresses the finer emotions, the finer and stronger must be our response. Let me remind you, our opponents do have a heart. Every single one of them has a heart. By opponents, I mean not only those on the other side of the world, what we could call Russia, but those closer to us, living among us, who are gung-ho on hating on whoever we call enemies. There's always a balance. On the one hand, we have our interests, and on the other, we have our humanity. What can we do with this balance? The Dalai Lama wrote this at the beginning of the war. I've been deeply saddened by the conflict in Ukraine. Our world has become so interdependent that violent conflict between two countries inevitably impacts the rest of the world. War is outdated. Nonviolence is the only way. We need to develop a sense of the oneness of humanity by considering other human beings as brothers and sisters. This is how we will build a more peaceful world. Problems and disagreements are best resolved through dialogue. Genuine peace comes through mutual understanding and respect for each other's well-being. We must not lose hope. The 20th century was a century of war and bloodshed. The 21st century must be a century of dialogue. I pray that peace is swiftly restored in Ukraine. Look, I admire the Dalai Lama, as of course most people do. And I like his conviction about the importance of nonviolence, that we should develop a sense of the oneness of humanity and think of ourselves as brothers and sisters. But what in the world could that mean in practical terms? How in the world can we actually do it? It's not going to happen by meditating or staring at a wall. It's not going to happen just by talking about it. I'm sorry, but I'm not a pacifist. I believe in the fight, but in fighting for the good and by the good. That is, fighting with non-violence. Is there a way to do that? To fight without using bombs and missiles or supporting those who are using them? Let's begin by admitting that we don't know what the objectives of either side are or what the real causes of the conflict are. There's always misinformation when it comes to war, what's called the fog of war. And we are as subject to it as anyone. Of course, we could find out more, and we do want to make an attempt, but to be honest, I don't think it matters that much. The main thing is not to take a side just because we happen to be on that side. We owe it to ourselves not to be bamboozled. It might be closer to the truth to say that both sides are wrong, or that both sides are right, and both sides are wrong. Who really cares? There will always be right and wrong, truth and ignorance. The point is not to find out who is right. It's not even to find a solution. It's to create a solution, transforming the causes of the conflict. How can we do that? It's pretty simple to say, I think. What we need, all we need to do, is to have the courage of heart and soul. How can we get that? The first thing, the main thing, is not to get caught up in the rhetoric. That's far more important and far more difficult than it seems. In times of war, social pressure is immense. In order to avoid it, we have to combat all of society, all of history, all of biology. And that's the key. That's what we need for freedom and for peace. But there's more we can do. Practical things that are a part of daily life. The war in Ukraine is just the latest and most obvious example of the little wars that are all around us and that we perpetuate. By acting there, at those tiny points of fire, we can begin to put out the firestorm that leads inexorably to war. Again, how? How can we do that? After realizing freedom, we need to join together. Isn't that obvious? Starting very small in one tiny group, as few as 2 or 3 people, but definitely more than one, in the place that we are right now, thinking and reflecting together with goodwill, refining our vision, preparing ourselves to go forth with a message of insight and immensity, a message of tenderness in the face of brutality, the brutality of those on the other side of the world and among our own friends and family, even here in a place like these ancient hills of Ojai, California. Do not be swept along by the human tide. Find out for yourself. Have faith that a resolution is possible. Have the courage of heart and soul. Visit the quest page for War in Ukraine. Click support to show that you are engaged here, beginning to build critical mass for discussion and action in your community.